Hello, welcome. Today I'm going to be going over flame tanks and recon tanks. I left them out of the video I did on tank combat with and which gun you should be using earlier on because they're a completely different discussion because you don't really need them, and it also depends on what you're trying to do with them. So let's start with recon tanks first. So recon tanks give you a base of 1 recon plus 2 per level of research, and we're doing this with 1939 tech. So when you add armored recon on, if you add enough armor to your tank, you'll end up with just over 5 armor, and that's about the break point for when you're not going to be pierced by enemy infantry. If we take off this armored recon, we're going to have 5 piercing. That is how much piercing you have with infantry equipment 2. So how much armor do you need to get over 5 armor? Well, it depends on the size of your division. If we up this to a 27 width, we're still good. Even going to a 30 width, we're still good. But if we went up to a 40 width, we'd be a bit under. But that's fine, 40 widths aren't really meta anyways. They struggle with the new coordination system. So I've designed a bunch of different recon companies. Let's go look at them. 15 armor is about that threshold you need to hit. This recon tank is a cheap alternative to AT if fuel is not a concern. It's just a basic high velocity cannon with a 3-man turret. Gives you a nice little bit of breakthrough and a nice little bit of armor. On the rest of these recon tanks, I've added 4 armor. It's the most amount of armor you can add without costing yourself an extra steel, which for some countries is an issue. And I've also added on the basic radio, just to give yourself a little bit extra breakthrough. These guys are going to be a little bit more expensive though. So Recon 3 is using the basic high velocity cannon. This is to add heart attack to your division and piercing, just in case you're coming up against enemy tanks. Recon 2 is pure soft attack. It's using the close support gun. And then Recon 1 is using the improved small cannon. So these are cheap tanks that you can make basically from the beginning of the game. Now let's go look at their impact on an actual division. So let's start with Recon 1. This is the improved small cannon. If we add just Recon 1 to a division, we're going to get 7.5 soft attack, 7.5 hard attack, a little bit of defense, 24.1 breakthrough, and a little bit of piercing. That's not quite enough piercing to actually be able to deal with some enemy tanks. It'll deal with light tanks, but the medium tanks that even the AI designs tends to have a little bit more armor. You kind of want to aim for about 40. If you notice, we're getting half the soft attack values, but we're getting the full breakthrough value. This is going to cost us 48 fuel per day when the division is moving. The way you calculate that is whatever your fuel usage is times 24. That's your fuel usage per day. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to use this as the base. If we swap to Recon 2, which has the close support gun, we lose all of the piercing and we lose all of the hard attack, but we end up getting 5 more soft attack. So this would be beneficial if you're going for a soft attack build. Recon 3 and 3.1 are for dealing with enemy tanks. They're going to give you about 40 piercing, which is about that threshold I mentioned. They're going to give you extra 5.5 heart attack over the improved small cannon, and it's actually only going to cost you 2.5 soft attack. And then there's the cheaper alternative where you don't really care about the breakthrough you're going to get from it. You're still at that 5.4 armor threshold, so you're good. You're just over that 5, and you're still going to get that 28 heart attack. This is actually cheaper than AT2, but it will give us 4.6 more heart attack. This armored recon with the piercing is what I used during my achievement run for neither Death nor Dishonor, where you can't lose a single tile as Romania. But those are your options. You can go for the hybrid. You get a little bit of both, pure soft attack, or mostly just heart attack. And if we go back into these designs, remember you want at least 15 armor. And you could have really cheaped out on this and just not cared about the breakthrough and gotten it even cheaper, and it would have been even cheaper than having AT. You can make it even cheaper. You can come down here, you can use the interwar light tank chassis, just slap the basic high velocity cannon on it and some wheeled suspension, and now we've gotten it down to 3.8 versus 4.62. Now the problem with this is it has no armor value. That's where using the improved chassis comes into play, because the improved chassis has a high enough armor value that you don't have to add armor and you'll still have enough that you're not going to be pierced. That's the advantage of Recon. Now remember, Recon does not do anything on the offensive. It does not prevent you from getting countered. I'd say Recon tanks are more of a luxury than a necessity. I would say engineer companies, artillery, and AA are all better than it. It can be a nice alternative for AT or something else that you're going to put in that 4th or 5th slot if you don't know what you want to put there. But I definitely wouldn't say it's better than the 3 I listed. Okay, so that's Recon. Now let's move on to flame tanks. Now flame tanks provide this attack value here. Now this attack value is not soft attack, hard attack. This modifier here is when you are attacking into these terrains. So when you're attacking into forests, flame tanks give you a 15% modifier, which entirely counters the 15% penalty you get from attacking into forests. So you net yourself no penalty. Now how useful are flame tanks? Well, it depends on the division, it depends on how big the division is, and it depends on if you're using tanks. Because tanks, by default, take penalties into a lot of terrain types, on top of the penalties they already get. The flame tanks can help counter those penalties. They're not going to completely overcome all of them, but they will some of them. We're now getting a 5% bonus into hills. We're getting 45% against forts now. We're still taking a minus 7.1% against urban. This modifier here is additive to whatever the terrain type modifier is. So urban's already 0.7, and then you would take your modifier here and you'd add it to that. So here we're getting a minus 27.1% in urban. So what that actually means is when we attack urban, we're going to have 43.1% of our breakthrough, hard attack, and soft attack values. So for tanks, flame tanks are quite useful when you're fighting outside of planes. They do nothing for you in planes, but outside of planes, flame tanks are quite useful. However, if you're using infantry, their use is a little bit more dependent. So I've done this math using the base stats of 16 widths, 20, 21, 24, 25, 28, and 30. These are their soft attacks and breakthroughs. So I'm going to compare adding a support company of artillery to a division versus adding a flame tank and its modifiers. So when you're defending, flame tanks don't give you anything other than 1.2 soft attack. And artillery gives you 8 more defense, which isn't that important for infantry, but it is a little benefit. So at every level, artillery is just better when you're defending than flame tanks. Flame tanks are worthless on the defensive. Now when they're attacking, I've got a couple different scenarios set up here. We've got urban / jungle, because they have the same penalty, forest, across rivers, and a level 4 fort. The yellow highlight is the break-even point. To the left of that, it's better to have artillery. To the right of that, it's better to have flame tanks. This is a 16 width. So if you keep going this way, a 10 width is actually better with artillery. 16 widths, it's about even, except for breakthrough is quite a bit higher. So if you're attacking in urban or jungles, you actually want flame tanks over artillery. If you can only afford one, you take the flame tank. And this largely remains true even if you're going superior firepower. So if we change this to 36, which is what it is when it's superior firepower, the breakpoint does move to the right at 9 and 1s, but you're still better off when you're using any of the bigger divisions. So when you're attacking in forest, breakpoint is a 9 and 1. So if you're using a 9 and 1, you don't really need flame tanks. But if you're going up to like a 27 width, the 9 and 3s, flame tanks are actually better than artillery when you're attacking into force. And you have the additional breakthrough. When you're attacking across rivers, the breakpoint moves to 9 and 2s for soft attack. So a 9 and 1 with support artillery is actually better across a river than a 9 and 1 with a flame tank. And then when you're attacking a level 4 fort or a level 5 from 2 directions, 6 from 3, 7 from 4, it's just always better. So flame tanks definitely have their uses, but generally speaking, you want to be fighting in plains where they don't do anything. But if you combine this with across rivers, you can start realizing you should probably be putting flame tanks on your marines, or if you're Japan and you're fighting through those jungles. Now, there is one drawback to flame tanks. They will cost you about 48 fuel per day per division. So if you have 120 divisions at 48 fuel, that's 5,700 fuel per day. Now, if you only did that for 24 divisions, 1,150, that's a lot more reasonable, a lot more affordable. So you don't want to be using flame tanks everywhere because they're quite expensive. They use a lot of fuel. So if you're not a fuel-rich nation, like you're playing Germany, you're going to be wanting to use them in dedicated divisions for attacking poor terrain. Alright, so let's get into the designs of flame tanks. I've got 4 different designs here. I've got your cheap interwar flame tank with the dozer blade, and this is going to cost you 2.8. If you take off the dozer blade, it's 2.1. However, this dozer blade is cost effective. So right here is the math for how much a support engineer company costs. And this is your cost per entrenchment for 1939 tech. So when you get 7 entrenchments, it's going to cost you 18 IC per entrenchment. For this flame tank, it's only going to cost you 10.5 IC per entrenchment, which means engineer companies cost 71% more per entrenchment than adding a dozer blade to a flame company, to your flame tank. Now, if you're using them strictly offensively, well then it's worthless. We've got a basic heavy tank. Now we're using the basic heavy tank because it doesn't cost chromium. And then we've got 2 different basic medium tank designs. So this guy's got a lot of breakthrough. So this is the expensive design. This is when you want to add a bunch of armor to your division and a good amount of breakthrough. And then we've got 2 medium tank designs. The expensive one, which is supposed to add a bunch of breakthrough, and then the cheap one, which is not really doing that. Let's go compare them. So the first thing to note is heavy flame tanks actually get less against forts than everyone else. Everyone else gets a 25% bonus. Heavy flame tanks only get a 20% bonus. So if we start with nothing and add the light flame tank, we're going to get 4 breakthrough, basically no soft attack, but we're going to get the percent modifiers. If we go to the medium flame tank and we use the cheaper one, we're going to get an 8.2, so an extra 4 breakthrough. We're going to be over that 5 armor threshold, and we're going to get the percent modifiers. If we swap to the more expensive medium tank, we're getting 16.9 breakthrough instead of 8, and all of the percent modifiers. If we swap to the heavy flame tank, we're now getting 30.6 breakthrough. Adding the light flame tank is going to cost you 42 production. That's actually cheaper than adding artillery. When you add the flame tank, it's 81. Adding this heavy flame tank is 278. That is just not cost effective. Heavy tanks in general are just not worth it ever. Question is, do you want just the percent bonuses or do you want some armor and some breakthrough from them? I did the math for just how much breakthrough you actually get. The top row here is the cost, going from a light flame tank to the cheap medium flame tank, going from the cheap medium flame tank to the expensive one, and then going from the light flame tank to the expensive medium flame tank. Going from the light to the cheap is a 94% increase in the cost, or an 83% increase in the breakthrough from the flame tank, but only an 8.4% increase in the total breakthrough of that division. When you go from that cheap medium flame tank to the expensive medium flame tank, you're going up just under 30%. In cost, you're getting 105% more breakthrough from that tank. But the actual increase in breakthrough is only 16.1%. When you go from the light flame tank to the expensive medium flame tank, you're going up 150% in cost. You're getting 275% more breakthrough, but it's actually only resulting in a 25.8% increase in the division's breakthrough. So not nearly as cost effective as it looks. Now there's one thing to note. Both the cheap and the expensive also make your infantry unpierceable against enemies that don't have AA. In single player, the AI has a tendency to not add AA. That's quite useful. In multiplayer, everyone's going to have AA, so that's useless. So in general, I would recommend just using the interwar flame tank, with or without the dozer blade. You can also use the wheeled suspension to reduce the production cost because you have 0 hardness anyways. Port companies do not have hardness values, so that doesn't matter. Because you have so few tanks in the actual division, your reliability doesn't actually matter. So there's your options for flame tanks and for recon. Generally speaking, be very wary of stacking these, especially when you're using smaller division types, like say a 10 width. A 10 width using both these support companies is going to chew through so much fuel because you need so many of these divisions. To properly cover a front against the Soviets using 10 widths, you need about 300 divisions if you want to push, which if they're all moving at the same time, so like when you battle plan, that's 28,000 fuel per day. Even if you're only using 120 divisions, if they have flame tanks and recon, that's 11,000 fuel per day. 11,000 fuel per day with 1941 fuel refining tech is 140 oil, which if you were to import all of that would cost you 17 civilian factories. Do be careful adding these to your divisions. They are incredibly expensive. Just from a fuel perspective, I would definitely not recommend it as a country that doesn't have access to fuel, unless you're adding a select number of flame tanks to just your tank divisions. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time.